I would walk into pet stores and I was like, you know, I'd walk in the front of them and I'd see these beautiful aquariums and, setups for thousands of dollars with stands and hoods and lights and coral. And I thought, that's great. It's amazing. You want to see that in your home. And then you walk around the corner to the reptiles and there'd be, glass glorified fish tanks, I think, and I was like, and then I remember going to some reptile shows, especially when Universal Rocks, when they first came out, and they started going to shows trying to break into that market. And I remember looking at the backgrounds, and I remember looking at the other side of the room at some of the PVC cages, and I was like, I remember talking to some of the builders and saying, have you ever thought about putting that in that? and they were like, yeah, but no one wants to pay for it. I was like, I think there are people that want to pay for it.
Welcome back to the Animals at Home podcast. My name is Dylan Perrin, and thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope everyone had a great holiday season. It's amazing how fast 2023 flew by, so I hope you all had a great year. And I'm very much looking forward to another full year of the Animals at Home podcast in 2024. Now, this episode today is the most overdue episode in the history of Animals at Home podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Paul Barclay, who is the owner and founder of Custom Reptile Habitats. Paul and I have been in contact with each other, and I would say friends with each other, since 2018, the summer of 2018. He was the one that originally reached out to me when he found the podcast. I want to say like 8 or 9 episodes deep. And we, at that meeting, when we first started chatting back in 2018, we thought we were going to do a podcast right away, and we instead let each other's businesses build and the podcast grow and his business build to a point where now it made a lot more sense to have a conversation with him. And obviously, he's completely sponsored my studio behind me, and that's where these beautiful enclosures are. And I have lots of compliments and people asking me about them. Those are Custom Reptile Habitat Enclosures. And Paul is the person behind that brand. He's the person that innovated that brand. And this episode talks about where he came from, his history with business, and what he plans on doing moving forward with Custom Reptile Habitats. And it's a very interesting conversation because we get into the weeds of the pet industry, which is something that really most of us listening to this podcast, including myself, really have absolutely no knowledge of. You would not have history of the pet industry unless you happen to work in that field, whether you're working for a large brand or in a pet store at a management level type thing. So Paul kind of lifts up the curtain, or lets us look behind the curtain as far as how the pet industry works, and it was very illuminating for me at least, and I know it will be for you. I think we should just jump right into the episode. Enjoy. Well, Paul, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, yeah, honored to be finally on the podcast. Been looking forward for this for quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this today, and I think this podcast is probably one that's been on the books for the longest, because we actually talked about doing a podcast when you first reached out to me all the way back in 2019, which is crazy. Like, we're talking about over 4 years ago, but that's how long this project you've been working on and me working on the podcast has been going on. And we'll get into the background of all that. But I think for listeners to know, I think it's so cool to know that like you and I started talking before Custom Reptile Habitats really launched. It was like very much in the new stage, and the podcast was very much in the new stage. I think I had released like maybe 8 episodes when you reached out to me. So it's pretty crazy to finally have you on.
Yeah. Time flies, doesn't it? But
yes,
the growth of your channel seems to have come up at the same time. It seems like a few of us were getting into this better care discussion, and here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, why don't we give people a little bit of background about yourself, kind of, your upbringing, where you grew up, and how reptiles and animals were influenced in your life, and then we'll start there, and then we'll get into some of the weeds.
Sure, yeah. Well, like just about everyone else on your podcast, I grew up with a fascination for reptiles. Was born and raised in Perth, Western Australia. So as far as reptiles go, that's not a bad place to be. From the early days, we were lucky to have a bit of a creek running through a 2-acre property. So I was down there catching frogs and all that sort of thing, and shingleback skinks that led on to in later years keeping turtles, and progressed eventually into dragons and snakes before I left Australia. But more of a enthusiast type thing, just a passionate keeper and so on. Just all animals in general, but specifically reptiles. That's always been my favorite.
Yeah, yeah, and it seems like your life took several different, I would say a pretty big turn away from animals as you went into your professional career. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that. And eventually it got looped back in. But I think that left turn into your professional career as a when you're first entering the workforce has a big role to play in how Custom Reptile Habitats has grown today as well. So why don't we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, I guess the early days, I was a skinny little kid, so I got into powerlifting and wanted to be my passion back then was to try and be a bodybuilder. And I started off 13, 14 years old or something like that, and did it all through high school, and eventually got into powerlifting, which was a good way to get bigger. My idol was Arnold Schwarzenegger, like many, and he started like that. So, and Perth, Western Australia was kind of at the time a bit of a mecca for powerlifting. I trained with multiple world champions, and we were just. I don't know why it was, but at the time we just had a good collection of folks that were into that.
So is powerlifting, is that deadlift, squat, bench press, those sort of movements?
Yeah, exactly. But they're the basics, and over I guess up to about age 23, I competed and won multiple state championships and so on. But at age 24, my priorities changed, and I sort of thought, well, this is all good and well, but there's no money in it. And I was doing hotel management. As I got bigger, there was more money in being a bouncer, and it was more fun. So I just kind of progressed into that, and but a little bit of hotel management, and then at 24, I thought, well, time to start a business. So I launched my own equipment company in Australia called originally Barclay Strength Systems, and that grew, and eventually had the agency for Nautilus, represented Nautilus for Australasia, which then gave me a springboard to kind of grow my business learning side of it into the fitness side of it, a fitness career. And then I had an opportunity with Nautilus to go to the Middle East and work for Nautilus as a marketing executive through the Middle East, which was a great, advancement, a great opportunity. So I took that, and that moved me on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's kind of gives you a foundation for where the business background came from, and then eventually you moved to the States. And were you back into reptiles once you moved into the States as far as business goes, or were you? Oh no, you were doing some the footwear.
Well, actually, I only came to visit. I was on vacation actually, and but things were a little rough in the Middle East. It was a good time to be there. Just a business issue with the company I was working with. They were having some financial difficulties, which kind of affected my package and all the benefits and all that kind of fun stuff. So I took a kind of a bit of a vacation, came here to visit a friend that I used to train with, and ended up staying. I had a 5-year visa. But in the end, I ended up, immigrating officially and became a citizen in 2001. But originally, yes, I started similar to what I was doing in the Middle East. We started a personal training franchise, and that kept me fairly busy. And then one thing led to another, and then I did in my spare time start bringing in shoes from Ugg boots, as we called them in Australia, and selling online, which I also enjoyed. And one thing led to another, and then I found myself launching a footwear company several years later.
Mm. Yeah, I remember being in high school when Uggs started popping up. I was, probably, I guess it was like 2005, that ish time, and 2006, and those started becoming more popular. So that gives people for listening just a very wide foundation of business skill, but at the same time, you have this deep passion as a child, and you have a passion for wildlife and animals. So did you have a goal to eventually have a business that was surrounded by animals, or were you looking for a job that potentially had reptiles related? Or
No, not at all. I enjoyed the departure from the powerlifting fitness slash career, if you like. I read a book many years ago called The E-Myth, and it was talking about the fact that, it's a theory, I guess, but that entrepreneurs, if you start a business, a lot of people say you're an entrepreneur. And this was a famous book back in the day. And it was talking about it's really a myth that it's entrepreneurs that start businesses, because, 85% of most businesses fail within the first 5 years. And one of the reasons is people lack experience, they lack the know-how, and a lot of the time, the people who go and start a business, they're very much related to what they do. So a builder will, perhaps before he was a builder, he was a carpenter, and thought, hey, I know how to swing a hammer and build a house, I should become a builder. And just because have the technical skills doesn't necessarily mean you know how to run a business, because there's a lot more that goes into it, the management, the marketing, the accounting, and the million other things that you learn along the way. So I kind of read this book and I thought, I always thought I was an entrepreneur. But in starting the footwear company and starting from a humble little website and then growing it into, in its heyday, it was called Wombat. And we grew it, I grew it into... I founded it, I should say, and then we grew and grew and ended up employing, 20 people just in the US, had multiple warehouses, and was sold in about 20 countries. So that departure for me, career-wise, was quite good, because it was doing something completely different that I knew nothing about, and yet in the end, making it successful. So that sort of thought, okay, well, I am an entrepreneur now. I can do something other than what I did all my life, and sort of progressed into it. So, that kind of led me into that. But nothing to do with animals. I stumbled upon it years after I sold the footwear company, and we got out of that. We, as in, to get very large in that type of business, a wholesale business, I needed a lot of partners and a lot of big money, because we were, selling millions and millions of dollars in footwear. And so, to move away from that, what was I going to say? Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
I think you were selling that business or moving on from it, and then
yeah. So back, it was about the time the recession hit, the Great Recession. So in 2008, things started getting tighter, and my financial partners were saying, things are getting tight, So I didn't have a lot of say in it, but the company was sold. And then I found myself, okay, well, what do I do? And it was a bad time to start a business. So I dabbled in all kinds of things. I tried to replicate the success of the shoe company, but had a few roadblocks there, with a lot of bad luck actually going on. Also a downturn. There was not a lot of things going on. One thing led to another, and after a few years, I'd started looked into a few different businesses, everything from a teeth whitening franchise to, shoes to, and eventually I thought, well, I'll just consult. So I started doing a bit of consulting. And it was around about 2013, sorry. I had an opportunity. There was an ad in the advertising here in Dayton for a sales and marketing manager for a reptile company. And I was like, wow, that's seems interesting. I love reptiles, and yes, I had kept quite a few over the years, just as an enthusiast while here in the States. And yeah, so I applied for that, and that was in Dayton, Ohio, and that was Reptiles by Mack, which propelled me from just an enthusiast, keeping reptiles on and off over the years, to suddenly the forefront of the fitness industry and in the pet industry in a big way.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And just to go back to the E-Myth book, for anyone, if anyone is actually interested in running a business, they should read that book, because I've also read that book. It was given to me by an accountant. They said I was running a business at the time, and they gave it to me. And yeah, it's amazing. So just a sidebar for anybody, if they want to, it's a very simple, easy read, but it's super, super helpful.
Yeah, it is.
So what role were you doing at Reptiles by Mack? It was mostly marketing, or?
Yeah, really, back then they were one of the three largest distributors, breeder distributors in the pet industry, and they were wanting to sort of grow beyond where they were. They'd kind of hit a bit of a one of those stumbling blocks where do we go from here? Sort of thing. And John Mack thought, well, I need to bring someone in, and luckily he gave someone from outside the industry a break. And it was kind of funny that I think I got the call on a Tuesday that we're going to hire you, and as like I said, sales and marketing. And he said, but we're doing a reptile show this weekend. Are you up for it? I said, sure, I'll jump in. So next thing you know, I'm up there shaking hands with some of the top people in the breeding niche, and a lot of these folks were like, "Who's this guy? He doesn't breed reptiles. He doesn't know anything about morphs, And but as John sort of thought, well, I don't need someone who knows that. We have that covered. We need someone who can help us, with maybe a different perspective. Look at what we're doing and come in with some fresh new ideas. So that's pretty much what we did. And I spent my plan was to I said, give me a month. I want to learn. I want to observe. I want to sit in on the meetings and see what you do, how you do it, and then I'll put together a formulated plan based on what I see. We'll discuss the plan and then we'll launch it. And that's exactly what we did.
Wow. And obviously it worked, because I know we were talking in the past about the sales increase, and so it was a successful partnership while you were there.
It was. One of the things that I learned from the fitness business was, and this was really from the president of Nautilus, a gentleman called Jim Teetum, and he was sort of able to really take Nautilus to a new level, and some of the it was never it started in the 70s, and it was a phenomenon when it did go up, but his strategy was really, look, we make great equipment, and people can buy it and we can ship it and it arrives on time, but isn't that the very least we should be doing? We should be, as a company, we should be working with our customers, which are the gyms and health clubs, and teaching them how to make money from using our equipment. Mm-hmm. So I sort of, I think you learn things along the path, and you pick up things as you grow. And I sort of applied that to reptiles and thought, well, if we're going to do this with the pet stores, wouldn't it be great if we could take the things that work and teach that to some of the stores? Because I will say it, in the multiple industries that I've worked in, from hospitality to fitness to / weight loss to footwear, the pet industry, it's not very sophisticated yet. It's got some big players for sure, but it's a relatively young industry. It's not that old, and we're still kind of figuring it out. And then we've got live animals involved, so there's a whole new element to that. So yeah, it was a bit of a challenge.
Yeah. And I guess for people that are listening, is as far as what the role a wholesaler plays, like you say, they're one of the top 3 largest wholesalers in the States or on the continent, probably. What are they? What does that mean for people that aren't sure? You know, they're selling to the stores, or maybe you could just kind of run through that, because people think, okay, are they breeding for people to buy? Like, do they have a storefront, or what does it look like?
Yeah, you never know. Very, very low key. It's quite amazing, really. And the volume, the size of the industry that people don't realize is quite breathtaking, really. So at the time, there were 3 big major suppliers. There's now 2, and things tend to consolidate and so on. And under that, there's a layer of medium-sized breeding companies and suppliers that all supply to the pet industry, and it sort of works its way down to smaller breeders who will, sometimes breeders will sell off their their excess stock to wholesalers, and ultimately, it ends up in the pet industry. But the demand, I just recently updated some numbers, and in just a short period of time, we went from 5 million homes in the US having a pet reptile to I think in just an 18-month period to another million. So they're estimated to be in about 6 million homes right now that have a pet reptile. So it's no longer a kind of little hobby. It's no longer a niche. It's quite a large industry, but it's also fairly young, not that sophisticated. And you'd be surprised how many pet stores have a store and they don't know the basics. So part of my strategy again was to sort of let's package this. We had a program called Grow Your Sales. And we would teach people about how to make money from reptiles, but how to do it properly. And so part of it was making sure that the right person got the right reptile. If it's a good fit, they will come back. And a little known fact is that the pet store business is really about residual sales. So the reptiles are the catalyst, if you like. But if someone buys a bearded dragon, the pet store is, they make a little bit of money sometimes for the sale of the animals. Some of the big operators do not make money from the animals, but they make money from the food and the supplements and the residual sales. So understanding that, you think, well, for example, they sell a bearded dragon, and that bearded dragon, he has food that only you can only buy from a pet store, right? You can't go to the Walmarts and the other big box stores or the grocery store and pick up your crickets. Mm-hmm. So they've got to go back. So reptile keepers in that particular category visit the pet stores up to 50 times a year. And reptile keepers, something like, I think statistically 77% of them have other pets. So the basket in the pet store business is off the charts for reptiles, because reptile people, if you love reptiles, you're an animal lover. Mm-hmm. Because I mean, anyone can love a dog or cat, right? A lot of people do. Yeah. They're fluffy and lovable and so on, but reptiles and that sort of thing, but it just so happens that reptile owners have normally dogs, cats, birds, fish. They have a whole collection of animals. So for the pet stores, they've got a very, very unique customer. They've got them. They'll come in often. And by the way, crickets are one of the most profitable things in the stores. Mm. So the visit, keep coming back, the add-on supplies and so on, and those dollars grow and grow and grow. So the pet store, there's a lot of misinformation out there about pet stores, but I don't think most people understand the size of it and what really goes on behind the scenes, because they don't want a customer to have a bad experience. if, for instance, if the customer does have a bad experience, and let's say they go home with an animal that doesn't do well and it passes away, normally the customer may move on to something else, or may just give up. You had a pet this year. Let's get you into this hobby next year. And the pet store it's in their best interest to make sure the animals are healthy. They do their best to get the information into the customer's hands, because they want that customer to come back for 10 years. They want that to grow and grow and grow. So that's the business of the pet store in the USA, and how they operate.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting. I've never really thought about the fact that in many ways, reptile keepers are the goose that lays the golden egg when it comes to like how many visits to this local store, whether you're going to your local reptile shop or your local box store to buy crickets or any feeders. I mean, you're, like you said, you're going to be doing it over and over and over again. And obviously it makes sense to incentivize having healthy animals with the proper equipment going home, so you have a customer with a healthy animal for the entire lifespan of whatever animal they went home with. For the box stores, because you're right, a lot of people have, and it's a conversation that we have on the podcast all the time, should box stores be selling reptiles? Obviously there are some negatives of box stores selling reptiles. It's probably one of the easiest places to do impulse purchases. However, that same thing happens at expos. It's the exact same phenomenon. So as far as the animals themselves in most of the box stores, do a huge majority of those come from wholesalers who are breeding in their facilities, or are wholesalers also bringing in lots of wild caught, and those are ending up in pet stores?
Caught these days is a small percentage. It's really it seems to be declining all the time, which is probably a good thing. I certainly believe it is. Most of the wild caught, I think we all know, does not typically do as well as captive bred. Mm-hmm. And of course, we've got issues going on with different habitats around the world, as we know. So there are some, but it's declining. But I, for one, would be most happy if the wild caught would disappear. We could. I think we've probably got to the stage where we could do without it in the pet trade for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. And every time I talk to you, you remind me of how large the industry is and how small. It's like the community the herpetoculture community, the community who's interacting online and Facebook groups, or listening to this podcast or watching YouTube. We often feel like we're the entire community, but we've got to be one of the smallest parts. Like we're a tiny fraction. The lion's share of the people keeping reptiles are people that don't engage with the community because they're whatever, it's a child's birthday gift, or they just have their one animal and they love it. And I know that from my own experience, because I had a crested gecko for 13 years. I still have him, but I didn't interact with anybody who kept reptiles. I didn't watch any reptile shows or anything. It was just me and my crested gecko. So there's literally millions of people out there like that. So a lot of what I think is, how do we pull those people into our side? But they may not want to be part of a community and talking about reptiles all the time like we do. But it is I don't even know if I have a question other than it's just funny how wholesome we feel like the community is when really we're just a tiny, tiny fraction of the full picture.
Yeah, it is. And it is vast. Like I said, in 6 million homes. We were talking about when we were all getting started 3 or 4 years ago, when we were just sort of starting to really get our businesses going in a bigger way. And I remember I wrote a post and I sent it over to Mariah at Reptiles, and I think the post was something like, if you're not a breeder, why use racks? And but the angle of the post, I think, was just sort of breeders make up they're about one in 400, so it's about a 0.25% according to USARK. And they estimated that, and this was for one of the Lacey Act battles that they had several years ago at the time when I was just getting started. They did a survey, and I think they kind of may have, they wanted to make it sound like there were more, or so the estimation of 10,000 was probably fairly generous at the time. And that was 10,000 breeders and hobbyists. And they define a hobbyist as someone who they're not breeding full time. They're not making a living out of it, but they're doing a little bit of breeding. They may sell the animals and reinvest in other animals, but they will progress into becoming a breeder. So that is much, much smaller than, of course, I think, USARC would classify it as an enthusiast, which is perhaps people like us that have multiple species, have been doing it for a long time. And we're a minority because the person out there that has one or two reptiles, it may just be a bearded dragon. And, I see it all the time. People like, ball pythons are most definitely the most popular reptile in the country. Well, they are in the breeding circle, and the amount of breeders, because of the ball python breeding niche, if you like. But it pales in comparison to some of the numbers of pet reptiles. Like a bearded dragon, for instance, is sold in vast numbers. Leopard geckos and a normal ball python is just he's like number 3 or 4. So and it's a different world. I'd lived here for I think almost 20 years before I even saw a breeding facility. I had no idea I remember the first time a drawer was opened and I'm looking at these leopard geckos thinking, wow, that's strange. That's how they're bred. Oh, wow. Yeah, I thought it was strange then. I still do now. My entire passion with reptiles is kind of like what you have behind you. I've always, if I have a reptile, it's like, I've got to build an amazing place for it to live in. And that's something that just interests me personally. So, I'd kept different species over the years. I'd even been to a local reptile show, but I had no idea of this world of breeders and so on. But yes, in the scheme of things, it's tiny in numbers. And you think, well, you can't have more breeders than you have keepers, obviously. So 400 to 1 is about right. But it's a symbiotic thing, isn't it? We have to have breeders because that's where the animals come from. We have to have so that's, and we also have to have pet keepers. Because the entire pet industry, as big as it is, behind the scenes, that's really is what makes it all go around. Without the pet industry, we'd be in a lot of trouble.
Right. Well, and that's what's that's what's so skewed about our perspective is, like you said, everybody would say, oh, ball pythons are clearly the most popular. They're all over the place. But that's because we have this small circle, and our small circle is led often by ball python breeders. And to us, we think that even the biggest ball python breeders are the biggest breeders, but as you're saying, like they're not even they're like a tiny fraction of what these wholesalers are doing. And I would like for you to expand a little bit on the importance of the pet industry, because again, as I said earlier, like quite often there's that conversation about maybe we shouldn't be selling animals in those pet stores. But how important is that just for, like, if that disappeared, would that just collapse everything?
I believe it would, and I'm not the only one. I know you've had Ryan McVeigh from VivTech on your show, and even Phil Goss. I mean, he comes from a pet industry background. I think Phil worked for ZoomEd, and also a wholesaler before he became president of USARC. So I'm only aware of a few people that have worked in that sort of size of it. A side of it that really understand it. But I know from talking to Ryan, I've seen him on multiple podcasts, and I totally agree that if we took out the pet side of the industry, it would crumble. It would crumble. And the reason being, it's sort of it's in the best interest of this industry to make sure that we can keep the anti-pet groups away. And they're the ones, of course, and I'm not talking about welfare. I'm talking about the animal rights folks who, some of those organizations would, they don't want us to have any animals whatsoever. And that's, they're pretty passionate about it. They're also way bigger than what we are and have massive budgets. And they're constantly, trying to stop this, of course, through legislation these days. Mm-hmm. And that gets pretty expensive. So we all hear about USARK, which, obviously they do an amazing job. But in the pet industry, you've also got PJAC, which is now called PAN, Pet Advocacy Network. And then recently, we've got Responsible Reptile Keeping that started up to help with the media side of it. But all of those organizations are well underfunded. They're stretched because, we're just under constant attack. So the pet industry is where the big money and a lot of the initiatives come in behind the scenes to make sure that we can continue to keep all pets, but particularly reptiles. So there's that. And one of the things that I don't think is well understood, and I mentioned this in that article, the post I submitted to Reptiles several years ago, is that there's a lot of things in the industry we may not agree with, but if we were to remove them, we could be dealing with unintended consequences. So, I see it all the time. Pet stores should stop selling animals. Well, here's what would happen. And if that happened, a lot of the supply companies wouldn't exist. So we're not talking about small numbers. We're talking about quite large companies and many of them, and literally thousands and thousands of people that work for them. And then you get innovation. All the innovation would disappear. So you're losing the protection, you're losing the innovation, and in the case of the growth of the industry, what the pet stores are also doing is putting literally over 1 million animals out there into the marketplace, with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of new keepers every year that begin this. And some, perhaps like us, will progress. So, we'll hold on to this, and we may grow. We may then find ourselves at a reptile show looking for something that you can't get to at a pet store, that pet stores won't ever sell. Something a bit more of a rarer species or a higher price point, perhaps, because pet stores, if you noticed, only sell fairly inexpensive animals. The more expensive ones in a typical pet store don't seem to move. So there'd be a lot of unintended consequences that could happen if we were to do that. So I've got a bit of an understanding of that, and I think that's needs to be taken into consideration.
I just want to take a short break from today's episode to thank each and every one of you for tuning in today. If you would like to show more support for the podcast, you can do that by checking out the show's sponsor, Custom Reptile Habitats. There is an affiliate link in both the YouTube description and the show notes. If you do make a purchase through that link, a commission comes back to me at no extra cost to you. The other way you can show support to the podcast is through the Patreon account. For as little as 75 cents per episode, you will automatically be added to the Discord server so you can communicate and chat with other like-minded keepers. If you do bump yourself up to the $5 a month tier, you'll have early access to the episodes and the opportunity to submit questions to upcoming guests. Again, I am so grateful for each and every one of you. This podcast is a lot of work and costs me a lot of money each month to run, and any support coming from your end is greatly appreciated. Back to the episode. Yeah. Well, and I think so that it becomes more of how can we help, as you kind of already had mentioned, but how can you help the pet stores improve their knowledge base to make sure that the animals are going home to the right people and that they have the right information and the right equipment, right? That's a huge thing. That's what we've talked about, and this will kind of circle us back to Custom Reptile Habitats. We've talked about this all the time where, if the bearded dragon is the most popular animal you can buy at a pet store, it's pretty weird that you can't buy a bearded dragon enclosure at a pet store, like a full size, like an adult one.
Yeah. It's changing. It's changing fairly rapidly, I think. I
Yeah.
remember, I was just thinking about it tonight. I think about 2 years ago, you had me on for a discussion with Patreon, some of your
Hmm.
Patreon members, and I jumped in there and that sort of thing. And I think someone asked me about large enclosures and how soon will they be in the pet stores? They're not carrying them now; they need to. And I said, soon, it's coming, it's happening. And here we are just a couple of years later, and the biggest stores sell, a 4x2 now. You can buy them online. The prices come way down. So these things are readily available. And I think consumer demand has driven better products. We're seeing Acadia products now in some of the big box stores. They're moving into bioactive, and I think this may be a little bit of a generational change, but I see it really, really accelerating.
Hmm.
And so I would walk into pet stores and I was like, you know, I'd walk in the front of them and I'd see these beautiful aquariums and you know setups for thousands of dollars with stands and hoods and lights and coral, and I thought that's great. It's amazing. You want to see that in your home. And then you walk around the corner to the reptiles and there'd be glass glorified fish tanks, I think.
Hmm.
And I was like, and then I remember going to some reptile shows, especially when Universal Rocks, when they first came out, and they started going to shows trying to break into that market. And I remember looking at the backgrounds, and I remember looking at the other side of the room at some of the PVC cages, and I was like, I remember talking to some of the builders and saying, have you ever thought about putting that in that?
Hmm.
and they were like, yeah, but no one wants to pay for it. I was like, I think there are people that want to pay for it. And it's just amazing. I'm talking about a decade that I've been just in this type of industry, and the transition already is quite impressive. But it's accelerating, probably like never before, both in numbers and in the offerings now for better care.
Mm. That's interesting, and actually, that's actually right. You do start seeing larger enclosures, and I think online sales and the ability to ship things is a lot easier. Because now that I think about it, at the beginning of the episode, I said we started talking in 2019. I think we started communicating in 2018 of that summer, and so I just remember that date, and I remember talking about this exact issue, because at that time you could not buy anything larger than the 40-gallon thing. So it is. I think because when you're in it, you don't necessarily see the growth, but you have to stop and look back and realize, oh yeah, like there is Arcadia products at PetSmart now, and I think the concept of caring for these animals better is becoming more pervasive, which is great. And because I always think, how do I get my podcast on the ears of the 6 million people that don't even that aren't that keep a reptile but don't engage with the community? But I think it seems like that's growing, and as like you said, maybe it is a generational thing. People are going to encounter keeping reptiles on YouTube for the first time. Like that's how they're going to experience it at the beginning. And that's going to immediately put them into our community before they go to PetSmart to buy their animal. So that's sort of a different way of the transaction happening, rather than before you might buy your animal and then that's it. So, I think this is for sure the beginning of a nice, maybe a slow gradual rise up to something, that everybody can be pretty satisfied with as far as welfare goes.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is, I mean, it's probably a lot of it has to do with the positive side of not only social media but YouTube. The fact that people into reptiles, they need to talk about it to start seeing ads for new products popping up online, right?
Mm-hmm.
And stumbling across podcasts, and then the influencers out there. Look at, they didn't exist a decade ago. A decade ago, one of the first people I met at one of the shows was Brian Barclay, and he had this small channel, and he was trying to break through, and he was a lone pioneer. And then look at it today,
Mm-hmm.
and look at number one, the growth that he experienced, but look at all the other influences out there, and how many they are, and the quality of the information, and some of the top people, what they're showing about care and reptiles and so on. So I think that and there's also a generational split. So I'm a baby boomer. I'm the last of the baby boomers, and then after me, you've got John Mack is, for instance, just a little younger than me. Brian that I just mentioned. We're Generation X, right? We represent 49% of reptile ownership, according to the World Pet Association's 2013, 23 actually just came out study. The millennials and Generation Y, the Zoomers, there's the other 49% already, and they're not even counting Alpha, which are the young, 10-year-olds, and they're already keeping reptiles, but they're not part of the survey. They're not even adults yet.
Yeah.
But it's accelerating there. So I believe that it will continue to grow a lot. But we got to be humble. We've got to be careful, because even though 6 million sounds a lot, it's only 5 or 6% of the population. And as it's been pointed out to me, that leaves 94% of the population that are like, you keep what, and a lot of those people are surprised that we can even have them. Think, well, you shouldn't have a giant snake or a lizard like that. How. So. We've got to be careful about that, but it's I think it's a generational trend, and it is accelerating like never before.
Yeah. And I think that's why, and I've talked about this in the show before, it's so important that your animals are displayed in a way that the average person can look at. Like, I can see the enclosure behind you. Is that for a chameleon?
Yeah. That's the first one I bought here in the built in the offices. Yeah.
So someone will look at that, and I don't think they would think, oh, why do you have that? They would think of that and they go, oh, wow, that's really cool. It looks like a zoo enclosure. Just like you would say, if you saw a really beautiful fish tank, your first reaction wouldn't be, you shouldn't keep fish. You think, oh, wow, that's an incredible fish tank. And that's what I hope people think when they see my enclosures. Oh, wow, that is the reaction I get when people come down here. They say, wow, that's amazing. That looks so cool. But if they aren't cared for well, and they're in these weird drawers and tubs, or just very unenriched environments, that instinct to think, should you keep this, comes out for people who don't keep reptiles, because it's just like a gut reaction. And I think we can thwart that by giving them something beautiful to look at, which, obviously your company now is a big part of. But so before we get into Custom Reptile Habitats and kind of how it started, or maybe we'll just finish off the Reptiles by Mack, because eventually you left that company. Did you leave to start Custom Reptile Habitats, or?
I was only consulting. So okay. I did the sales and marketing side of it, both of them in-house, for a little over a year, I think. And the commute was a bit of a challenge, raising my daughter at the time. So in the end, I said, I'm going to move on. And John sort of talked me into staying. He said, look, we've started all these programs. I want to get the food line going. A couple of other things. We were writing articles for Pet Age magazine that went on for 7 years or something like that, a monthly article. And so he said, well, what if you just work from home, and I'll help you get your office set up and that sort of thing. And we just marketing, just behind the scenes. And so that was a good fit. So I was able to do that. But I think I was, always pretty clear that I'm doing this to pay the bills at the moment, but I'm an entrepreneur. I want to start a business. That's what I've done all my life. And I'm looking for something. But I never dreamed, even then, that I was going to start something in reptiles. But I put up a website and I started selling a little bit of universal rocks, and got a little bit of traction, and one thing led to another. And that sort of, gave me a little bit of hope, I guess, just in the early days, that I think there's a business here. I think it's moving in the right direction. I have no interest in, small volume, cookie cutter type habitats or whatever it was. I wanted to do something that was looked good, that people look at and go, wow, that looks beautiful. And again, it's a personal interest, but I thought there was a business there, and it grew.
Mm-hmm. So how do you start something like that? Like, as you said, there's probably a hole in the market to be filled by a brand, but How did you go about starting, like designing enclosures, or because even back then, I feel like the flat packed thing wasn't even around. Like nobody was really doing that. There maybe was, but I didn't know. So how did you come up with the idea and grow it?
Oh, really? Just I think a lot of the things with businesses, you got to be at the right place at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you can have a very successful business, and it can be almost impossible to replicate. I really am a firm believer that it's a lot of it is timing, and I just think it was the right time. Universal Rocks were out. I was seeing other companies sort of emerge, bringing out bigger things and some flat packs. And I thought, yeah, this is happening. I need to get into this. So I started in my 2-car garage when we were talking, and I got to the point where I had one model, and I was selling some Universal Rocks, and I got to the point where I bought out a 6-foot enclosure, thinking, well, if I've got a 4-foot and I'm selling X many per month, a 6-foot, which is a lot more expensive, I won't sell as many. But I brought one out, and it just blew my doors off. I sold way too many that I could even produce. And I thought, well, okay, hang on. I think I'm right here. There's a big demand for something bigger, and at a higher quality, something a little bit different. My approach to design has always been, let's build it up to be the best it can be, versus, let's just do what everyone else has been doing forever. So that took off. In fact, that was a bit of a problem back there because I didn't have the capacity. So I ended up refunding most of those orders and retooling, which is when I moved into this current building in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, just as that was beginning. Yeah. So it was. I think it was a little bit of timing and just kind of getting a little bit of a taste of it, and then it kind of gave me the confidence that this is a business. But I didn't. I end up. We have 2 large buildings now, but I didn't anticipate even needing the second one. It's changed a lot in that period of time. We're talking 5 years, right? So the industry has changed a lot, and so is reptile keeping. So I think just a lot of things lined up at the right time and gave me the confidence to go for it.
Yeah. Because it is interesting to think about, like you said, 5 years ago, it would have been hard to tell for maybe just the average person to think, is something like this, like a premium enclosure that's large, is that going to be the thing that takes off? Because rack systems were becoming more and more popular. Morph breeding was becoming more and more popular. But again, now we're talking about the herpetoculture community that's sort of saturated through the morph breeding, and there's a lot of people out there that just have the one animal that want the big, large display enclosure, and they might have come from the fish background, from the marine background, so they're used to spending a couple $1,000s on a fish tank. So to spend some money on an enclosure is not foreign to them, and obviously those are some of the people that have been wanting to purchase the enclosures. Does the because you did help Brian set up his first zoo, what's it called? A reptarium.
Yeah.
Was that at the same time you were starting the Custom Reptile Habitats as well?
I'd already started Custom Reptile Habitats. So I'd already launched it, and I was doing a little bit of Universal Rocks. And then, but I was just getting started, so little tiny website, no traffic. No one knew who I was. Universal Rocks was, there'd been a lot of reptile shows, but didn't really get a lot of traction. In fact, I think he'd even given up on reptile shows by then. And his main business is pools and gardens and that sort of thing, where he's got a tremendous business over the summer. So there was that, and I was at one of the shows, one of the I think it was an NARBC show, and I was walking past Brian's table, and he had the Reptile Prime brand, which is a coconut bedding thing. And I remember, I was trying to have a word in his ear, and Brian was swamped with with fans and things like that. And I thought, well, I'll call him next week. So I gave him a call and said, hey, what are you doing with the Reptile Prime? And he said, well, I want to start a business, and this is what I'm doing and that sort of thing. But I've got a lot of things going. I said, well, I'm looking for something to do. I'm looking for a business. I need to get stuck into a business. So we kind of worked together for about 10 months on that. And the goal was to grow that into lots of different things. Reptile Prime with someone like Brian behind it. I thought that's got a lot of potential to get into caging and lighting and substrate and decor. So I talked to Universal Rocks about private labeling on an exclusive basis and so on. And then I found out Brian was, had a building next door and he was wanting to do a zoo. And I thought, if you're going to do a zoo, you've got to do it with Universal Rocks. So introduced Brian to Stuart at Universal Rocks and put the whole deal together. And, we were down there multiple times in Dallas building the first cages. So that was an experience, I'll tell you.
Yeah. I can imagine. And a lot of work, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It was crazy too, because, I was thinking about this the other day. Back then, I remember, I think Brian was at about 450,000 followers-ish, but growing rapidly. And I think he, as we were doing that, he passed the million. And that was huge. No one had done that yet. And, obviously YouTube is what he's very, very good at, and his core business. So we were talking about it, and I remember him saying, I need this much to make this thing work and to break even, and do you think? And I'm like, Brian, it'll open a whole new audience. Look, I watch your channel because I know you, but I don't care about breeding. I don't care about racks and morphs. For me personally, I'm not interested in that. But show me a big enclosure and I'm fascinated. I'm the kind of person that goes to the zoo and spends all day there just looking at the exhibits because, that's just something that personally interests me. So anyway, and of course, that's one of the most amazing things I think is that once he launched that, he pivoted from being a traditional breeder to, look at all the expansions and all that he achieved with that. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Very
But
cool.
It was interesting back then that he was sort of thinking, do you think it'll work?
Yeah, you're right. It opens up a whole new side of the audience because you're seeing other animals and you get, like you said, it's kind of like going to the zoo. Let's talk a little bit about the products themselves. Custom Reptile Habitats is the company. You have the Maximum Reptile brand, which is the enclosures themselves. Why don't we just, for people that just have no idea, I mean, ironically, we're recording this at night, so my background, you can see it, Paul, because through my webcam, but my actual camera, it's pretty dark behind me. So but people watching my podcast are very familiar with my enclosures that are Custom Reptile Habitat, Maximum Reptile Enclosures, and that's the set of the podcast that you so generously sponsored, and that's why my set looks great. I have this compliments all the time, but let's give people who have no idea what they are just kind of a breakdown. We've already talked about the flat packing, but just give us the elevator pitch for the enclosures.
Well, I called it Maximum Reptile because isn't everything about reptiles? What's the minimum? What's the minimum size? And I've never really thought that way when it comes to pet keeping. When I was a kid, we caught some tortoises or turtles, I should say, in Australia, and we built this giant water tank enclosure for them, and we had some shingle banks in there and so on, and that's just always been, the way I look at things. So in looking at the current caging standards and what was there, everything was minimum. And you're right, I'd look at the pet stores and thought, well, isn't it crazy? There's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of bearded dragons sold throughout the country in every pet store. And at the time, very few of them actually had a suitable enclosure for it that would sustain it for its life. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense. So I came up with the name, Maximum Reptile. being the opposite of just the norm, if you like. And it also, everything that I've sort of done career-wise, I've always tried to be the best, no matter whether I was competing or my equipment. It was the slogan was built to last, and it was bigger and better and stronger and better designed over the less expensive imports. When I got into the footwear, my footwear brand had more features than my competitors. In helping sell reptiles, and my little stint in the pet industry, in that side of it, it was like, well, we should be selling reptiles, yeah, and getting it to people, healthy and on time. That's the least we should be doing, but let's take it to another level. So I thought with Maximum Reptile, they should be bigger, better, stronger. I'm a big one for UVB. And I looked at all the different screens out there and thought, well, I hear about cats sitting on them and clawing through them, and they block half of the UVB at least, and some more. And so, I sought out doing a better screen top that allowed more UVB through, doing a sturdier frame where you can build something giant, like in the corner, or stack hundreds and hundreds of pounds to the ceiling, where you can do 8-foot long enclosures. Features like ventilation at the front and deeper substrate dams, and I'm one for, if I'm going to manufacture, I want to make a quality product, but I also kind of like made in America. Mm-hmm. I think that's a big deal. It does cost a lot more. Our materials cost more than some of the less inexpensive enclosures retail for. Right. It costs but it's a lot heavier and stronger, and I know the PVC is USA made and that sort of thing. So it's just a quality approach, trying to be well designed, well built, authentic, authentically made here, and with a product I can be proud of. So that was that. But the other side of it was good, but a lot of people, they don't necessarily know what they need. So, putting together, we all know the starter kits in the stores, and we all know that they're woefully inadequate. So, if someone goes into a store and walks out with $200 worth of stuff, is it a starter kit? Will it keep the animal and sustain it for a while? Yeah, and it does okay, but there's better stuff out there. So, marrying it up with the better lighting, and of course, universal rocks, I wanted something that also looked good, that you could be proud to put in your living room, not in the basement, not hidden away in the garage, a feature in your home that people who may not even be into reptiles will walk in and go, wow. Mm-hmm. Just as we do with, I love fish keeping. I've kept fish over the years, and not now, but a beautiful decorated aquarium. I mean, there's a reason that people will spend thousands and thousands of dollars on it. So I really thought and wanted to apply that towards reptile keeping, to marry up to where at least the fish are, and after all, we as an industry are almost as popular as fish keeping now. So shouldn't we move up to that level? Yeah. So that in a nutshell is really what it's about. And, with superior kits, the decor, something that looks really, really attractive, and a quality product that is designed around what the reptiles actually need, and not dumbing it down to the bare minimum that we can get away with.
Yeah. And the keeper assembles it, so if the shipping is a lot cheaper than trying to you can't ship a 8x3x3 assembled, that'd be a nightmare.
Yeah, and price is always an issue. If we have time today to talk a bit about the pet industry and how price sensitive it is, there's a whole issue there. But definitely, obviously we want to make a quality product. It is difficult making it in the US. We have a much higher cost. And, I paid my people well. We've got, full health insurance and vacations and pay time off and sick days and all that kind of thing. And that comes at a cost. So we have to be competitive, but it's that balance between being competitive and not compromising too much. But shipping has got a lot to do with it, yes. So being able to pack something flat and have the person assemble it, kind of like the IKEA kind of thing. You've got high-end furniture, but you don't go shipping a fully assembled bed or a wall unit or something like that across the country. You normally go and pick it up locally. Mm-hmm. And our industry is not that big. We can't take care of our business here with just the local business. So we must pack them flat, send them across the country, and be competitive. But we're not the only ones, and that I think pack flat in reptiles has been happening for quite some time, and for maybe for that reason.
Yeah. And I just think about the screen itself. It's funny because, I think many people are familiar with the classic, maybe I would say maybe like the original PVC enclosures, which were the ones that weren't flat packed. They were the ones that are solid and, have the plexiglass door and whatnot, and solid top as well. And, people would run a heat panel or heating tape or whatever to heat. And so to put a screen on top, I just know people are... From our point, from the people who are focused on proper lighting and everything, it makes so much sense. But there's a whole group of people that are like, why would you put a screen on top? It makes no sense. It's just funny how different the sides of the community can be.
Yeah, well, most do have screen tops. Just go to a pet store. And I think one of the other things is there's a lack of understanding about not only the importance of pet stores, as we talked about, and I'm not promoting pet stores by saying, hey, they're the best thing in the world. I think they need to improve. Like there's a lot of things in our industry that needs to improve, but they are very, very important. And the numbers out there, not only the numbers and the benefits that we talked about, but to satisfy 1 million or so pets out there each year, it comes down to always economics, doesn't it? Mm. So inexpensive setups are kind of the norm for a very good reason. But and even the numbers in those, the numbers that go out with the big manufacturers, the Zoomeds and Exeteras and Zillas and so on, the numbers are phenomenal. The truckloads of product that they ship out every single day. And it kind of goes under the radar of, I think we have a tendency to be so much in our group that we, don't see what else is going on out there. And perhaps that's a bit of the downside of social media, is that people will see a breeder, talking about, this is how I keep my snakes and things like that. And there's breeders who will tell you we should stop doing that and showing that. Mm-hmm. I've heard it, the butcher shop doesn't show you where the meat comes from. You just you see maybe not a great example, but I think it's true. It's a massive industry. There's so many people out there, so.
Can we talk a little bit about the? I just remembered this, the ball python experiment that you guys had. I think it's at the shop with a large enclosure with the tub, because you'd ruffled some feathers when you'd post a picture of it on Facebook, and so maybe just give the people who have no idea what I'm talking about just a rundown of what it is.
Yeah, that was interesting. Well, I planned that for some time, and it really amazes me. And I think, and again, I'm circling back to that article I wrote, but we don't understand a lot of segments in our own industry. A lot of keepers don't understand breeders don't understand keepers. No one understands pet stores. Rescuers say, stop breeding animals, we've got too many. And if we all got together in a group and really understood what each one's doing, we'd realize the importance of all of those. So, but people go in their groups and things like that. So the not so much the breeders, the big breeders, most of them will tell you that the documentary just came out on ball python breeding a few days ago. And that was featuring a lot of people who were saying it's a business, and unless you really are a good businessman, you won't be successful. And so that is a very, very different thing from pet keeping. But because of online, people see the racks and things like that, and we've got the keepers attacking the breeders, saying you shouldn't be keeping them like that. The breeders who may be doing it for financial reasons will say, well, this is the best way to keep them. So we've had that silly argument going on for a long time. But I mean, and let me tell you this story. We get cancellations where someone has bought a ball python kit or a 4-foot enclosure, or maybe larger for their pet, and then they get talked out of that from a breeder or someone saying, no, it's too big, it won't do well. So now we will, try to save the sale, but I've got a cancellation policy. So, okay, well, we'd like to know why, but you can cancel. So, and we save most of them, but there's a portion that will still, no, it's too big, it won't do well. And so that costs us probably well over 5 figures every year in refunds. I couldn't tell you how much people who may have bought a product from us or from other people that never did, because they think, well, no, I've seen it online, this is the best way to keep it. So we've got that whole argument going on, which is kind of crazy. But what we tell people is, well, you do realize it come from Africa, and all reptiles, yes, they'll hide in tight spots, yes, but it's not about the size of the enclosure. They come from a giant region, right? It's always about the perimeters, and it's all about, do you have the right temperature, the humidity? Do you have the places for the animal to hide and feel secure so that it can, not stress and settle in, and so on and so on. So this was really an interesting experiment. And I thought, well, I think what we'll do is we'll show the tub portion of this enclosure first, and we'll say we built a tub, and then maybe a week later we reveal that it's actually a subterranean tub that's connected to a giant 900-gallon mini habitat. Well, mini as in scaled down from the wild, but pretty big from ball python standards. Because I've watched hundreds of podcasts where people have said they won't leave the tub and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, we did that, and what was really interesting, and my staff talked me out of. They said, you can't wait a week, Paul. People will lose their minds. I said, well, what about the next day? I'm like, and I said, okay, well, we'll do it. And then a few hours later, we'll show the reveal. So, okay, we'll do that. So I put up, we built a tub, ... And we got all kinds of comments. People, customers of ours were like, oh, that's it. We'll never buy from you again. You've lost your mind. How could you do this? Oh my God, the sky's falling. I thought you guys were into better welfare. And then I think it was about 3 hours later we put up, and then we added, this 900 gallons showed this giant enclosure. So that was interesting. But I think like I said, it was a bit of an experiment, but it just goes to show how people, I think we have to be more accepting and understanding. Again, even folks that just breed morphs. I mean, it has very little to do with the pet industry. Most of their animals, are just going to other breeders, collectors, and they're breeding them, and that's what they're doing. That's their interest. Some of those animals, particularly from the bigger breeders, will eventually become pets, but it's not a part of the pet industry, if you like. It's a bit of a byproduct. So, we've got a lot of this infighting. But again, it was interesting because some of these comments were like, well, where did your ball python come from? It was most likely bred in a similar setup, and that's where we are, and it's evolving, but it's where it is. And it's also very price sensitive. We can't just put them in bigger enclosures overnight. I've brought out a new product sort of offering, I think in a positive way for those of you out there who are wanting to get into small batch breeding. Here's a new model. It can be stacked. It's on a lower price point. It does have lighting. You can add UVB, but it's a lower footprint, and and that's gone over very, very well.
So that's an enclosure. It's not a tub. It's an enclosure with some height, but also allows height, lighting, heating, however you want to, halogen fluorescent UVB, and it can be stacked. Something can be stacked on top. The enclosures can be stacked on top. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And no, I did. It's gone over very well, but it can't just be changed overnight. I'll give you an example. I remember.
Actually, before you give that example, can you tell us what happened when you put the ball python in the tub and into the huge enclosure?
Well, the ball python I got, she's 19 years old, ex-breeder. So, and she's been in a tub. I haven't been to a breeding facility, a commercial breeding facility that has opaque tubs. Most of the big ones that I've seen for the pet industry have, translucent tubs. They're generally a little bit bigger, but not that much. So, a typical kind of that was her life for 19 years. So I've got a typical tub, put her into that, but I put a camera in there and watched her. And I just thought, well, I think, again, one of the things that we need to do when we add animals to a new environment is allow them time to adapt. And so I put the camera in there. I thought, well, I'm not going to throw her into 900 gallons just in there, but there's a tunnel where she can choose to leave. And I was watching her. In fact, we were out to dinner that night. I had my phone set up and I kept watching it while we were eating dinner. And after a while, she was moving around the tunnel and I saw her. She went up about halfway and sort of stopped. And then I watched her, and then, it was recording time lapse and motion. And after some time, she kind of came back in. I thought, okay, that's interesting. She chose to look, but didn't want to leave in the first day. I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. However, the next day, when I woke up the next morning, checked the tub with the camera, not there. I thought, okay. So she was in one of the multiple hides that I set up. I haven't been able to catch her on camera yet. I do need to grab a couple more cameras, but the enclosure is floor to ceiling. And so I've got a couple of Mist King units up at the very top. They must be about 7 feet up in the air and a good 5 feet off the substrate level floor. There's rocks and logs and things like that. Because I believe in time she'll learn and start utilizing some of the climbing. That was my theory anyway. But what keeps happening in one of the corners is the Mist King nozzle keeps getting flattened. Mm-hmm. And I'll come in the morning and it's spraying the water on the glass. So it's like she's moving it. She's climbing. I just haven't caught her yet. So, but yeah, I think we've had her for about 3 months. So I do believe it takes some time for any animal to transition. And there's another thing that I think we really need to understand as an industry, that, if an animal has spent considerable time in an environment, you can't just click another environment and expect it to adapt. It will take time. And perhaps, I think one of the theories at the moment is you gradually increase the size and the stimulus, and you don't want to just flood it with too much stimuli, So that's interesting. And I've got a little story on a leopard gecko that I had at home in a 3x2 setup, And when we moved her to the office, this little leopard gecko, she was out, previously in the day. If I move her food dish around, she'd be out like, hi, got food. And so I tried to recreate as close as I could. Included her food bowl, a few of her hides, same smells and things like that in a new similar sized habitat. But introducing just a little leopard gecko, she took about 5 months to adapt. So she started off, not even being seen. We didn't see her for weeks. And then we'd start seeing her, but when she saw us, she'd scurry back. And then occasionally we'd catch her out basking, and then she'd see us and scurry back and hide. And it took about 5 months before she'd be out there laying on the slate, broad daylight, not caring. So I believe that it was in her mind, probably the most important thing was not being eaten. That am I safe from predator?
Yeah.
From a predator. Is this is new? Is something going to swoop down and eat me? Is something am I going to be eaten by a snake? I'm going to be squashed. And it took all that time for her to feel comfortable to the point where, okay, so, and that was an outgoing leopard gecko who was almost fresh out of the egg, only weeks old, and straight into that habitat where she started climbing walls. So if that's a leopard gecko, imagine, how long does it take for a ball python, for instance, which is typically a more shy animal, to adapt from, 19 years in a typical, breeder sort of a setup to something that is a fairly large area by our standards, that, is hopefully something pretty close to what she would experience in the wild. So it's only been 2 or 3 months, but again, it takes time. Indications are, and quite often we'll find her out, in different spots. So she does move. She's active at night. We catch her all the time, but I don't know the answer yet. So this is kind of an experiment. Is it going to take a few more months, or will it take a year? Will it take longer before that one adapts? In comparison, perhaps to we've got a juvenile ball python, and that little guy, had 2 or 3 feedings from a breeder, and then straight into our 4x2 ball python kit, and has multiple hides and and so on. And that snake is out often, during the day, mainly cryptic basking. But when the lights go off, about an hour later, he's active for hours. So totally different reactions. One that was introduced to that very, very early versus one that was a mature adult, So that's going to be fascinating just to follow.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny that you say 5 months, because I always think 6 months is a good time to think about, to give your animal to adjust. Like, I mean, I've even moved animals in their same enclosures to a new home, like to a new human home, where theoretically nothing is different for them. And even that can take 3 or 4 months for them to start acting and behaving normally again, because they know this is it's a different place, whether it's temperatures or whatever, or the shock of being rattled around, moving from one place to another. So they are very sensitive creatures, and they get used to their habitats. And so when you do make a change, you have to be so patient, and months and months and months of watching and waiting. And that's perfectly fine and normal. And ball pythons give you a lot of time, because they're not going to starve to death in a month,
I think that's another thing that I see all the time is conversations with breeders. If you put my animal into a 4x2, it won't do well. And I think some of these conversations are exaggerated. Also, I think I'm not picking on the breeders so much. It's I think a lack of understanding on all sides. But it's not, we're not having the same problems in the pet industry. So a typical ball python, let's say juvenile, they're hatched, they get 2 or 3 feedings, and they're shipped off to the pet store. When they get to the pet store, a typical setting, they go into a larger setup with decor, substrate, hides, lights, and people walking past all the time. They seem to adapt because they're not spending a lot of time in the breeding facility, and they're introduced to that change fairly quickly. On average, a ball python in 6 weeks is then becomes someone's pet. It goes home usually into something bigger, maybe a 40-gallon, maybe something larger, and the stores and their care sheets are saying, well, it needs at least a 40-gallon, probably something bigger by the time it's an adult. UVB is beneficial. Here's all the information. Someone goes home with a trifold brochure. The pet industry is not having, thousands and thousands. I mean, we're talking about, I didn't crunch the numbers on ball pythons, but it's up there. Talking about probably well over a good 100,000 or so ball pythons become pets in a typical pet store throughout the USA each and every year. And if those pet stores were experiencing people coming back, here's the cage, my animal, he hasn't eaten for 2 months, it's not happening. Now, I'm not saying there's not a small portion of that happening statistically, but I'm just saying for the most part, it's not happening. So is the secret in adapting them quickly while they're young into a more, to get that stimulus? I think there's something in there.
Yeah. There's some irony in that, right? Where there's the breeders in our herpetoculture community will say the lines that you just said, right? If you put them in too big of a space, and certainly people do mess up the care of ball pythons on occasion, and then you have animals that don't eat. But in reality, there's like 100,000 ball pythons where 95% of them, will give an arbitrary percentage, are doing fine as pets in homes. And we know that by virtue of the fact that the big box stores are selling them, because like you said, they would not sell them if they were having too many customers unhappy with that species, because they would never mess around selling an animal that's going to cause them more trouble than it's worth. And that's how big corporations function. They don't sell things. They sell things at a price point that makes sense for them and their customer.
Yeah, it's exactly right. It's a business model. Okay. And we benefit from it. Again, there may be a lot of things that we don't agree with, but we need it. And I think we have to look at the fact that it's changing and it's improving for the better all the time. Same with the pet keepers looking at the breeders. And I'm not, again, talking about so much the ball python breeders, because that's a different thing. But the pet suppliers and the breeders and the folks that are supplying the pet industry, just recently, and part of the motivation for the new enclosure design we just talked about, was the fact that PJAC, which is now called PAN, they brought out about 4 years ago guidelines for pet suppliers, and they wanted to have a very comprehensive manual, standards for fish, standards for birds and mammals, and of course reptiles. And it's everything from how they're cared for, how they're shipped, how they're received, because we as an industry, we're being scrutinized. So we've got to look at are we being responsible? So when the anti-pet groups come knocking again and again and again, we can put our hands up and say, look at all that we're doing. And so that reasonable people can listen to our argument and say, you know what, that's pretty good. I'm not buying the narrative that all these animals are sick and dying, because they're not. I'm look at what the industry is doing to take care of these, not only on a financial level, but on an ethics level. So that happened a few years ago. And if you look at the standards for reptiles, they're talking about they should be kept in adequately sized enclosures. They should be provided with enrichment, which is suitable for the species. And then only this year, they launched a press release saying that all reptiles and amphibians in a breeding facility for the pet industry should provide UVB. And so, and that's only just a few years after mainstream pet stores started adding UVB as a recommendation to their care sheets. So, it's probably comes from influencers and advanced keepers and shows like yours where people can learn about this. More and more people demanding that, so that the pet stores demand it, and then the suppliers have to adapt to a higher level. So that's just happened in this year. So I think that's a big accomplishment.
Yeah, that's amazing. So are the wholesalers, are they capable of pulling that off? Are they capable of having some enrichment or potentially adding UV? Is this something that obviously price points might have to change for what they sell their animals for, but is that something that they're capable of doing?
Yeah, it'll take time. It'll take time. I think there's two ways to force, well, not force, but to push change. And when I say push, it's coming from the consumer demand, isn't it? The consumers are demanding a higher level, and so the suppliers and the stores are upping their to cater for that demand. But is it going to be a revolution or an evolution? The difference, of course, is a revolution is a change like that, where an evolution is over time. And I think it has to be over time. It would be too disruptive if we would they need this level. It just can't be done. And I hear about it on two levels. And on the breeder side of it, let's take, the pinnacle of breeding at the moment is the ball python niche, right? And we see keepers saying, well, you need higher standards, bigger, and UVB and so on. For the ball python argument is, well, the animals would cost 3 times as much. That's nonsense. And it's nonsense because if a large commercial breeder can breed a ball python for $50, a lot of these folks that may have something at home with no overheads and so on. I've seen reports where they've said, well, they can get a breeder ball python for about $25 or thereabouts. But in the pet industry, you're lucky to make 2 or 3 times cost. So you've got these massive breeders. Put it into perspective, recent reports on Morph Market, which is the largest online classifier, as I understand it. I think they've had record months where they're moving 8,000 animals in a month. That's a normal week for a pet supplier. That's just every week, those kind of numbers. And there's lots and lots of suppliers out there. So, but they're working on very, very small margins. So a change in that can be very disruptive. And I'll give you an example in a moment. But for the breeders, they're costing, let's be generous and say they cost $50. 10 times cost is 500, right? 100 times cost is 5,000. And some of these morphs are going for 25. I've seen them go for $80,000. Mm-hmm. So, the margins are phenomenal. Could they change that? Yes. But is there a reason to change it? Their motivation is not so much in animal care. It's a different thing. So I think we have to, tackle that in a different way. But the suppliers who have got very, very thin margins, the slightest price increase can have huge impact out there with the stores. So there was a situation, and I had consulted with several people in the industry, so I won't give up names, but there was a chain that had increased the price of their bearded dragons just $10. They had new management. They thought they needed to make more money out of their animals. The margins were low. They did that, and the price of the bearded dragons went up quite a lot. But they thought, well, we're selling a lot less, but we're making more money. But what they didn't have was, average store will sell about 85 bearded dragons a year. So times that by about 5,000 pet stores in the USA selling live that specialize in reptile and have a reptile section. And they're pretty big numbers. A $10 price increase resulted in that chain selling half as many, just like that. So we have to be careful. These things have to happen gradually over time if we're not going to wipe ourselves out. Because again, there's powerful groups that want us to stop doing what we're doing. So we have to, I think, better understand all the sides of it. And, you know, of course, all the infighting, the anti-pets are just watching it, taping it, recording it, and they love the divide and conquer kind of thing. But yeah, so it's very price sensitive. There are segments that could, if it was motivated, I think they will change for other reasons. I've got some theories there, but the pet industry, the changes that should happen and probably need to happen, to be realistic, they need to happen over time, but they are. So
yeah. Well, and I know that there are people who listen to the show, and even myself, sometimes you walk into a chain pet store and you're frustrated by certain things, like the products that they sell, they're inadequate, or, you know, why don't they sell the better thermostats and things like that? But we have to remember that we aren't the customer, we aren't the average customer of those stores. So our stomach to pay for things, we have a different threshold to walk in and drop money on a $500 thermostat or whatever it is, where you have to imagine the average person, like, everything is priced in there to make a sale, and because it's a business that has to operate and can't go under, and that's where that sensitivity comes from, is the average consumer walking in. Just like if I was to walk into a place to buy, like, you know, fishing supplies for, like, going fishing, you know, catching wild fish, I wouldn't want to spend hundreds of dollars on a hook, because why would I? Where my neighbor at the lake would spend $500 on a hook because he's a professional fisherman. You know, so we are a small section of the reptile keepers, so we don't really have much sway over the products that they sell. So I can imagine how sensitive that market is, and to make an adjustment like that, you can really make a big error.
Yeah, you know, I've good friends now with Emily and Ed from Snake Discovery, you know, because we've done some things over the years. And one of the things I really like on their channel, and I think I even watched the video before I even knew them. Emily used to be a manager at PetSmart, and so she has that kind of background. And you know, if you watch her videos, you know the care that they do, and they're very, very progressive, even with the breeding. You know, those ball pythons are in boa-sized tubs with multiple heights, substrates, and so on. And years ago, people were talking about the level of care that they're providing for the breeding side of it, which is a nice progression, right? But I remember they put a video out, and they were talking about the pet stores. What do you do if you see an animal that's not doing well in the pet store? And it's been a long time, so I'm just, you know, remembering what I saw back then. But I think Emily was recommending, you know, don't go and blow up social media. You know, bring it to the staff, and if they're not responsive, bring it to the manager, but not in a complaint like, you know, you're not doing this right. You know, hey, I noticed this over here. Can I help you? You know, and if you don't get progress then at the management level, you know, pick up the phone, see if you can get through to corporate. But you know, let's try and help them. You know, versus just wiping them out, cutting them off, and putting out on the internet that, you know, they're all terrible and they don't know what they're doing and all the animals are terrible and they're all dying. Because number one, that's just categorically false. But it makes us as an industry look bad when we're doing that without realizing it. We're shooting ourselves in the foot every time. So, you know, they're not perfect, but they're an entry level that, like it or not, they're very, very important. If you want to keep reptiles, that is an important part of it. It's evolving. It does need to change. It's moving in a direction. But if we complain and try to shut them down, we're somewhat hurting ourselves or the industry in general. But if we can, and I don't have the answers on exactly how to do it. I'm just saying, you know, as a theory, if we can help them and better understand them, that perhaps is a better way to progress rather than just complaints.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and there will be a large portion of people listening to this right now who got into reptile keeping through a chain pet store. I mean, how many? I mean, I didn't get into reptile keeping necessarily through a chain pet store, but I got into keeping animals through, chain pet stores, whether it was fish or birds, which I originally got into, which is kind of a gateway into other, specialty pets. And so they do have their purpose. And if they function properly and sell an animal to somebody who's responsible and sell them the proper equipment, and as you said, they're starting to sell larger things and better lighting and all that, and technology is improving in those stores. That's not a bad thing. If someone's going home with the proper equipment and the proper knowledge, then that's no different than going to your local reptile shop. That's what we want. We want people to have a good, positive relationship with the reptile and have a good experience with them, and not have them die in the first year or whatever, which we know is another kind of a fake stat that the PETA people throw out, or animal rights people throw out. But if we are blowing up PetSmart for having a sick animal, guess who sees that as well, right? That's where the animal rights people step in and go, hey, look at this. They can't even do it at the store, so why should people be able to do it?
And where they fit into the industry is entry level, and that's all they're good at. Pet stores don't generally sell. I'm talking about the mainstream. Animals are much over $300, $300 to $400 is tops, and they don't sell very many of those. Most of what they sell are the lower, so it's an entry level. But and I think on the breeding side of it, I mentioned the ball python side of it. We can jump up and down and say, you should have more, you should have bigger, and that sort of thing. But you should provide UVB or whatever we want to say. But that doesn't help what they're doing. They're breeding, different morphs and different patterns and so on to other breeders, and it's a niche. It's somewhat related, but indirectly, right? So they're like, no, they're just going to, and that's what I wrote in that article. They're going to push back, and many times, particularly these are small businesses, that this might be their livelihood, so they get attacked on that side of it. So I know that they will push back against pet stores. Some may see pet stores as competition, but by better understanding, well, hang on, they're putting, hundreds of thousands of new customers into the market, and some of those will progress and they'll show up at the reptile show and they'll want to buy that next level, the next level that the pet stores can never do. So they're creating hundreds of thousands of customers. We're seeing a downturn in the ball python right across reptile breeding at the moment. We saw a peak in the pandemic, of course, and a bit of a downturn now. We're going through a natural cycle, and a lot of breeders, a lot of conversation about what do we do with all these animals, and wouldn't it be great if they better understood pet keepers instead of attacking us? That, wow, these are potential customers in massive numbers. There was a very good conversation going on at one of the podcasts, and they were talking about, wouldn't it be great if, well, I think it was Hold Back Rack podcast, which is a good one. I think they do a good job, talking about not only the breeding side of it, but the ethics side of it. And they said, come on, these we shouldn't be keeping pets the same way that we breed them. Come on, it's different. And if you're selling to the pet keepers, the last thing we want is an animal that doesn't transition well. So if you don't know how to transition into, say, a 4x2x2, learn it, buy one, set one up, learn it, get into it, because there's a whole there's a whole new market there that we could be selling to of these keepers progressing up, that wanting more. So I think there's a positive that we should be sending to anyone in breeding, the small batch breeders that maybe don't have an outlet, that there's more market share out there, and this is a whole new market. We're not enemies. It just needs a different angle to get to sell to. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think there's different approaches, because and I've reached out to folks that were quite in their set in their ways, just a few years ago. Just nope, this is the only way to do it. And now, they're commenting on our posts about the giant 900-gallon enclosure for a ball python. So I think just with conversations and so on, I think we can make a difference there.
Yeah, and you're so right. As the consumer habit changes, the consumer wants to keep their animal in a large enclosure that they can see and interact with in that way. It only makes sense for the breeders to attempt to accommodate that because of how much more people they can sell to if they do. And this is always a piece of advice that you give me is that we tend to over-focus on the breeders, trying to get them to change this, change that. But you're right, though they're kind of trading animals with each other in a lot of ways right now, as they are, it still tugs at your heartstrings for the animals in those conditions, but you have to ask yourself, where is your time better spent, in the 399 or the one in the you had given that ratio 400 to 1. It's 400 pet keepers to one pet breeder, or one breeder at least, like you said. So we have this tendency to want to focus on that, but it would make more sense to have your effort on the pet keeper, because that is 99% of the people out there, and that's who need your help. And then, as those people start to improve, the breeders will be kind of, it makes sense for us to at least have an experiment. Maybe you do have a couple larger enclosures for transition zones before you sell an animal to a pet keeper, and you're going to sell more animals that way.
Yeah, and I was talking to Bill Strand, actually. He was just visiting, and we were talking about this. And I've got a lot of respect for Bill. I mean, his knowledge is through the roof. And I said, "What do you think about this?" And he said, "Paul, we're Europe. We're just like Europe." And I thought, there's the analogy. That's exactly right. We're all in the same continent, but we're all different countries. We have different languages, different philosophies, different religions, but we're still connected. And, the Netherlands might have a problem with, I'm just throwing countries out, Italy, but, because they speak a different language or something like that, but they accept it. Mm-hmm. They don't try to change it. If you want to go and visit Italy, this is the way it is. If you want to go and visit the Netherlands, this is the way it is, and so on. And I'm not saying it's perfect by any means, but I'm just using that as an example. And I think, all this nonsense about we all need to come together, and what are you talking about? We've all got totally different agendas, and and even if you breed for money, you don't want anything to happen to your animals. Mm-hmm. You don't. It doesn't matter whether you're the biggest breeder in the world or a small hobbyist breeder. And if all you're interested in is money, you still don't want anything to happen to them, and if you're, someone like us that will spend thousands of dollars on a setup and hours and hours and hours just for fun, we're still connected by the fact that we're into reptiles, and I think there's something to be said there. We're never all going to come together and all speak the same language and all live in the same place, and that's just nonsense. We're too big for that. We're too diverse, but we have to be more accepting, I think, of all the other groups if we're going to be successful. And again, we're not the breeders and the hobbyists and all the different segments. We're not the enemies. The enemies are the people who just want to wipe us out. Mm-hmm. So that this stops. And they're very good at what they do. There's more laws, there's more rules, there's more tactics than ever before coming in to try to wipe us out. And there's the enemy. When each other little group, I mean, we are connected whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
We need to, I'm not saying all be great friends and things like that. I'm just saying we just need to better understand the situation.
Yeah. And exactly. And if it can be a slow evolution, as you had already said, to continue to improve in all those different countries, little areas of our community, that gives us more protection against the animal rights. So maybe to kind of start to wrap up, we can finish on these animal rights groups. It's kind of a sad note to end on because they're so, because they're, as you said, they're getting very, very good at what they do. But they do give us problems, and they are constantly helping fund legislation and getting into people's ears, and also lying in a lot of sense, putting out things that are not true, and so one thing I definitely I meant to bring this up earlier, but people will talk when we're talking about Reptiles by Mack. Many of the listeners will know about them because they're a wholesaler. You don't interact with them as a consumer; it's just a regular consumer. But many of us will know of them by the PeTA piece that PeTA had put out I don't know how many years ago that was, but it was not that. It was 5 years ago, maybe 4 years ago.
No, and, 7 years ago, 16.
Oh, 7 years ago. Okay, wow, 2016. So maybe we could talk about that just briefly, because people will think, oh, Reptiles by Mack, isn't that place that PeTA kind of had that piece on? And that will give us a good example of the type of tactics that they will use.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a very good example of the industry not understanding and jumping to conclusions too quickly before getting all the information. And I think some of the investigations, if you want to call it, that they did in the past were, I think there was a couple of facilities that were bad, in as much as, there was a keeper that, for financial reasons, they weren't taking care of their animals and they had to be rescued, sort of thing. And the anti-rights group will, grab that and paint the picture that all facilities are like that and so on. I remember I was, doing the marketing, in my office and at home, and sometimes I wouldn't even go to the facility for 5 months or something like that. I had no reason to. I sent my invoice in every week, and we talk on the phone and email back and forth, and that's how I did my job. I got a call one day, and it was from John Mack, and it was the he just got a letter from PeTA, and they had put not one but two plants back to back, not similar, not at the same time, but over 15 weeks, I think it is. So a little over 3 months, posing as an employee in a large facilities supplying the pet industry. And I think they had about 100 employees at the time. And at the same time that he received the letter, this video came out about, and I think it was, I think there's a total of about 11 minutes that ever aired of, what they said and, they showed and so on. But looking at the narrative and the video that was put out there, it was, so far from what was going on, it's not funny. And I remember seeing the, I didn't see the original letter that they got, the complaint. I certainly saw the videos and all the uproar. But I remember seeing a letter from the attorneys, or maybe perhaps it was, I think I read it. The accusations were, all the animals are being, not all the animals are being deprived food and water. And there's a gotcha, a title, if you like, that's out of context. And that went out there. Oh my God, thousands of animals, what PeTA were asking, as I understand it, were when the animals were being transported, putting into a box and shipped to the stores, FedEx overnight, guaranteed 10:30 a.m. delivery. Just like every other breeder, anyone that's ever ordered anything, that's how you get reptiles online, right? They were suggesting that the animals, while they're being transported, should be provided food and water. Or if they're packed the night before, packed in the box, that they don't have food or water. There were other accusations, and of course, and there were some things that they got. Reptiles by Mack behind the scenes, they didn't go public with it. They felt that it was a tactic, that they were wanting to lure them into a public battle that they would use for a fundraising stunt. And they didn't want to know about it. They thought, no, we want to protect our customers. We're wholesalers. None of this is true. We'll push back through our attorneys and say, sorry, animals are never deprived food and water. Bearded dragons are fed multiple times a day. They've got, 365 days a year. If you went through the facilities, whatever you've seen online with reptile breeding facilities, times it by 10 as far as level, sophistication, technology, and I'm not talking about the best husbandry, as in pet keeping. I'm talking about, commercially supplying the animals, but making sure that they're bred, they're fed, they're healthy, they're shipped to the store, with the slightest possible issues when they get to the stores. And that's the truth of the matter. So, behind the scenes, they pushed back very quickly and very aggressively and said, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. They put out public statements or just on their website, really pushed back. I felt that they should have gone public and immediately put out videos with showing the facilities, all of the facilities where they were. But they didn't want the publicity. They said, no, we don't want to accelerate it. We think it's just a tactic. No. The things that we thought could improve, we fixed them. It's PeTA. We don't agree with their strategy. We, absolutely disagree with the allegations. And that was the tactic. They also immediately said, open house. Anyone in the industry can come to our facilities at any time for a tour. You can go anywhere you want. Very few people took them up. I remember calling a couple of people, and Phil Goss was one of them from US Arc. He came down a couple of days later and toured the facilities, and some of the customers were concerned. Come on in. Nothing ever happened. And nothing ever happened for a reason. You never heard anything bad before, and you never heard anything bad after, because it was PeTA, doing what they do, cherry picking a little bit of information and making it sound, sensational. And, you'd be surprised how many people within the industry just bought that whole thing and didn't question it, So yeah, that was pretty amazing to watch all that happen.
Well, and that's the thing it's like this, we're in this era of basically shock journalism, right? So these big headlines come out and things happen. And then, but you realize, like, how come there was no, fines or why didn't I'm blanking on the government officials that would come in and take care of that sort of thing. But, there would be, it's an actual crime, right? It's animal cruelty if these things were true. So there would have been fines, there could have been arrests, there could have been a bunch of different things. And like you said, there's nothing with that. So there's the two PETA videos, and then it just fizzles out. But the thing is that people see those PETA videos and you don't actually look to see what actually happened. And I'm sure there were things. I actually, it's been a long time since I've seen those videos, but I'm sure there were things in the videos that were maybe not great, or maybe there were sick animals. Just like if you're breeding thousands of animals, there are going to be sick things. Or if someone went into anybody's reptile room at any time, they might say, "Hey, there's a dirty cage," or whatever. But it's just the sneaky tactics, and I guess it's like a tactic in bad faith, essentially, that they use.
Out of context. There were examples of, our people witnessed, so many animals passed away, during those 3-month period. It's like, well, yeah, that nobody wants to see anything happen to animals. But, it doesn't matter whether you're a farmer, if you're a hobbyist, commercial breeder, animals get sick. It's just a fact, and sometimes they don't make it. We're all heartbroken when we have a pet that does that, and, so you can take it out of context, and it's like, okay, yeah, but how many tens of thousands of animals went through there in that period of time, and what percentage is it? And I think if you put it into percentage, it'd be better than most of the, the best breeding facilities out there. You'd find that. So a lot of things taken out of context and cherry picked. Some of the things I think in the statement was that Reptiles by Mack pushed back and said some of these things were staged, and they pushed back legally with their attorneys. No, that didn't happen. That was staged. That person that was posing as an employee was supposed to be taking care of those animals. That person was supposed to, if there's something was not doing well, bring it to their supervisors. Glue traps are supposed to be checked every day, not hidden in a corner for weeks. so I can get some, so there was a lot of things perhaps that were, it's my understanding anyway, that were grossly exaggerated to fit an agenda, and that, that's how they work. And it's not just them, they had a go at Zoomed a few years ago over caging standards. Mm-hmm. And, PETA initiated a lawsuit against Zoomed for that. So it doesn't matter who it is, and there's a theory. I've heard this theory before. One of the reasons, again, you'll never hear anything bad about Reptiles Mack before or after. By the way, the company's grown about 5 times the size since then, which if there's something wrong, that's not possible. Mm-hmm. So you just have to look at that. But they went after a big supplier for the pet industry. They went after the chairman of the Herp committee at PJAC, which was John Mack was there doing that. By the way, the same guy, the same association that just introduced UVB for the breeding second and working on the manuals and all that sort of thing. So that doesn't make sense. But let's take down the biggest people in the industry. So a target, let's go and find a problem. Let's put in a plant and see what we can find. And that, as I understand it, was their tactic. So not everything is as it seems. And a lot of this was taken out of context. And again, anybody in the industry can go there for a tour. And I've taken people there, and they normally walk around with their mouth open, just, oh my God, this is amazing. Some of the morphs that come out of there, some of the keepers, the knowledge that some of these specialists that have in the different departments and the technology and so on that goes into commercial breeding. And I'm sure some of the other big facilities are just like it, very, very sophisticated, but it is not the way that our opposition portrayed it, for sure.
Yeah. And like we said, that's always going to be the danger. Those type of groups are always out to end keeping as we know it. So why don't we wrap up with, the future as we move forward into, the next 5-10 years? Do you kind of have a vision of how reptile keeping will be and what should it look like?
Well, I think as far as numbers, we're just scratching the surface. I can see that 5 or 6% of keepers turning into, over time, I don't know if we'll achieve it in 5 or 10 years, but it'll turn into 10% and more. Reptiles are a great pet for, especially, I remember going to a talk on millennials. And millennials, each generation has different things that they're interested in, right? Different characteristics, if you like, that they're known for and so on. But the trend is to go to smaller. When I was a kid, I was the weirdo that kept reptiles or like snakes, oh my God, how could you do that? My daughter grew up with it. My granddaughter, it's normal. It's just like a dog, a cat, a snake, what are you talking about? Mm-hmm. So I think we're going to greatly see this grow. The trend towards better care began years ago, and it is accelerating. It's snowballing, and it's changing from the biggest retailers in the world to the biggest suppliers to cater for what demand is going to. I think caging standards will improve. I just saw the rollout with Acadia with the new lighting and so on. There's technology like that we will probably, I think, move towards. A setup will cost a lot more, yes, and it'll be more accepted. I think the lower things that we know now will look back much like we look back 30 years ago at some of the little turtle tanks, and we have progressed that much. So what took 30 years will probably now take 5 or 10, as far as better care, better keeping, and so on. So, information, I think it seems that we're starting to standardize things and wrap our heads around common things like care sheets, and standards and all this sort of, the new technology. So Yeah, I think it's a really, really exciting time. And I think, again, we are really going to progress a lot. But again, we can't shoot ourselves in the foot. Remember, I think a lot of the infighting is just giving ammunition to the anti-pet groups that they're looking for these little cherry-picked pieces that they can do. And it won't be, they may go after a bad actor, but they'll also go after, a biggest, most respected name is not because they can twist it and turn it and so on. So pet stores are under attack, breeders are under attack, responsible reptile keeping who have are based in the UK. They've just brought out something where, show your pet first of the month is, my pet. And they're starting to get this movement because the anti-pet groups, remember, PeTA bought into Facebook, and they have a shareholder stake so that they have a seat at the table. They don't make decisions, but they are a shareholder and they can give some influence. And so, animals will no longer be sold on Facebook. And so, they're trying to start a movement where we shouldn't be showing someone holding a reptile because it makes it more mainstream. So they're even trying to stop that. So as we are accelerating, I do think that they're accelerating in their attempt to stop us. So again, we can't unite around and all be on the same page. We are Europe, but we're connected. And there's the infighting and squabbles is not that we're not the enemies. It's the people who want to prevent what we're doing are the enemies. So I think we're in for some exciting times, but I don't want to build doom and gloom. I think the anti-pet groups are on the wrong side of history. And we're not just talking about reptiles. I mean, they don't want any animal ownership. And you think, well, hang on, man's been connected to animals. We can never be separated from animals. Mm-hmm. And I think, where we were 100 years ago or wherever, I mean, we're always progressing. The zoos today are way better than they were when we were kids. Everything is moving in the right direction. And we kind of need that sort of thing, right? Habitats are disappearing. Animals are becoming extinct. We need zoos. We need captive breeding. And we're doing a better job today than ever before. We know how to keep them alive. We know so much more. We don't have the same kind of problems that other pet sectors do. We have a problem that they live so long, and even to the point where, and I've been corrected a few times, it's not so much a rescue, it's a rehoming issue. And I was, Snake Discovery, they rehome a good 500 or 600 animals every year that are surrendered. And they got a great program and they're really passionate about it. And they bring a lot to the shows and they adopt them out to good homes. And I was thinking rescue, all the, no. Most of our people, someone's moved on to college or their life situation has changed and they can no longer keep that reptile. And so I think we've got to get better at that side of it. But we're doing such a good job compared to where we were years ago. So I think that's a really good, a wonderful trend as far as reptile keeping today, but it will get better. And, that's exciting.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And I mean, as I've talked about on the podcast a lot, I think there's so many great reasons to be able to interact with this hobby and to keep reptiles. And you mentioned a few of them, whether it's conservation or just understanding how they work or just having that rich experience connecting with nature. And there's an endless list of things. And I think in general, we can really make it a positive experience for both us and the animal and the wild counterparts of those animals to make sure we're not, just taking everything for ourselves. We want to make sure that we are doing this in the most ethical way possible. And I think a brand like Custom Reptile Habitats is really helping push that because it's giving people more options, more space, more ideas. So Paul, this was a fantastic conversation. I knew we'd go way over our time because there's just so much knowledge in it. No, it's all good. Like there's just so much. It's rare that we have the insight into the industry, and I think that's probably one of the most revealing things is that having an understanding of how that industry works and how the infighting is really not helpful. So I appreciate you coming on the podcast today. I appreciate you creating Custom Reptile Habitats and helping push the entire hobby forward, also supporting my podcast by being a sponsor and helping me set up my studio here, which is incredible, and I get compliments on it all the time. And as I said at the beginning, you reached out to me when this show was very small. It was, I think, 8 episodes in, so you were looking for people who had the right philosophy, and it wasn't like, oh, I'm just going to go find the biggest influencers, or you found me when I probably had less than 1,000 subscribers maybe, and it was just the message that I was giving you agreed with, and that's what I want people to know. It's not like you just went out and found big YouTubers. You went out and found people that you agreed with and had the right philosophy, and you actually didn't seem to care that there was almost nobody watching those channels at first, so that's amazing.
Yeah, well, thanks very much. Yeah, things take time. I'm in it for the long haul, and I think I'll leave with this. I've always wanted to do things, or ended up doing things as far as a career. Things I was passionate about, things I enjoyed. So I don't want to sound corny or anything like that, but I get a kick out of someone who we get calls from people that have been keeping animals for years, and we get calls from people who have never kept a reptile and coming to us for advice. And it's a nice feeling to get someone set up properly. And then next thing you know, you see the post of this thing that's set up. And you're like, wow, they've just set up this beautiful vivarium with all the right, and they've decorated, and we helped them with some of the supplies, but they've gone to other resources to learn, the lighting and how to do this and how to do that. It's an exciting time, but it's rewarding to see that and know that the animals are going to be better for it. So yeah, I think it's the feeling's mutual. I'm glad that we have got this far and can continue to sort of promote this, because it's a good thing to be involved in. I think it's not just a financial reward. It's also, we're helping. Mm-hmm. We're helping people, we're helping animals, and it's a good business to be in. So I think that's what keeps me motivated anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's clear that it's fueled by passion, which is, I think, the right way to go about something. Can you let everybody know where they can just quickly, any Instagram or the social media or the website, anything, just so people can go find you online?
Sure. Well, Custom Reptile Habitats. If you Google it, we're in Dayton, Ohio. The website's got all the social media. We do a little bit of it. I don't have a lot of time. I have there's 8 of us now, but I'm still doing a lot of things and wearing a lot of hats. I'm yet to get the right social media manager. But all the links are there, the Facebook, Instagram. Got a small YouTube channel, but lots of playlists. So great conversations that I'll bookmark. So there's references there to lighting, bearded dragon, and a lot of resources on our website as well. And we've got a toll-free number and full-time customer service people. So you can call us anytime, email us questions. We're here to help. So yeah, Custom Reptile Habitats, and that'll find us.
In Dayton, is the showroom open to people to walk through? I know that was a plan eventually. I wasn't sure if you're at that stage yet.
Yeah, it's been a part-time thing, and we've kept growing, luckily, over the years, and to keep up with demand and more facilities and so on. So I wanted to open it years ago, and it kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed. But it's mostly finished. The showroom's open, part-time hours during the week, Monday through Saturday, for local folks, but we're expanding it already. I'm still finishing it. We're still working on displays, but we've got all the Acadia Biodude, and of course we've got a pretty good sized warehouse here. So we stock pretty good range of plants, universal rocks, and we don't yet have many enclosures in stock, but we're working on that for local customers. So yeah, it is open. Hopefully, the way we're going, I can get it finally finished where all the displays are done. I've got to yet transform the showroom into a giant cave. When it's done, we'll have the grand opening when it's 100%, and then you'll get an invite. And yeah, I'd love to see you down there. So, but yes, it is open for local folks, and yeah, we've got it moving anyway.
Okay, awesome. Well, I would love to be there for the grand opening. That sounds amazing. And until then, well, we'll stay in touch. But until then, obviously, we communicate online quite often. But until we communicate next time on Instagram or via text, it was great to have you on the podcast, Paul. I'm so glad we were able to do this. Like I said, this has been a 5-year coming, so it's amazing. So thank you so much. This was amazing.
Yeah, well, anytime. I enjoyed it. Thanks for the conversation. Keep up the good work.
All right, that is the end of that episode. Paul, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast and spending the evening with me. And also, I mean, I've said it a million times and I just can't say it enough. Thank you so much for supporting the show and supporting the podcast. From day one, it's been really... It was just very motivating for me to have somebody with a sort of a business mindset, with a brand in mind, that saw the value in the message that the podcast was giving, and I think that was really helpful for me. And it's been so cool to watch both Custom Reptile Habitats and the podcast grow essentially on the same wave. I mean, both of those entities are separate completely, but they're riding that same wave of the increasing welfare of the animals that we're keeping. I think that's the philosophy that both are built on, and it's been so amazing to see that message being so well received within the community, and both entities are able to grow because of that, and that's been amazing. So thank you so much for jumping on the show and supporting me. And listeners, thank you so much for listening to the episode. I'm sure you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you share it on social media, Instagram or Facebook. And if you haven't checked out Custom Reptile Habitats, make sure you go do that. There is affiliate links in both the YouTube description and the show notes. Again, that is an affiliate link, so if you do end up making a purchase, whether it's an enclosure or a universal rock background or anything else, a commission comes back to me at no extra cost to you, and of course that helps support the show. So if you want to support both brands, Animals at Home and Custom Reptile Habitats, that's the best way to do it. If you would like to join us on Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/animalsathome. And any more information on the podcast network, you can find at animalsathomenetwork.com. I will see you guys in the next episode.